All right, the last one we're going to do, ICA 15.3. We're going to use a pretty cool tool called Goal Seek that will help us work through looking up something. Okay, so Tyler's company has hired you to find the EBIT indifference point for the following two capital scenarios. So you've got two capital scenarios. One's all equity, one's half equity or some equity and some debt that we see. And so he wants to know what's the point at which we are indifferent based on earnings before interest and taxes. Okay, so we have to use this formula right here. We have to find the point where our stock financing, the EBIT minus our interest expense times 1 minus my tax rate, all divided by the number of shares outstanding, where these are equal that we have. Okay, so we're given these two scenarios. Scenario A, all equity structure in which $4 million would be raised by selling 100,000 shares of stock. So we have a tax rate of 40%. Okay, we have an EBIT that we will calculate in a minute. Okay, we don't have any interest expense. Number of shares is 100,000. And so our earning, that's a million too many. Okay, so our earnings per share, we just use the same formula that we have up here. Okay, so we have our earnings before interest and taxes minus our interest expense, which would be 0 for this, times 1 minus my tax rate of 40%. All that divided by the number of shares outstanding would give us that. Oh, yep, needed to add that in there. Okay, so double check this, times divided by, oops, nope, we don't want that. We want, very important that you get your formulas incorrect. Okay, so we want that. So we have our earnings before interest and taxes minus our interest expense times 1 minus our tax rate divided by our, let's see, number of shares. Good. Okay, that looks good. So for the bonds, right, part B says you have $2 million in long-term bonds, so $2 million, right, with an interest rate of 10%. Okay, and so we're going to have a certain level of EBIT on this one. Okay, so one thing we want, we're going to make sure these are going to be equal to the EBIT here, and this one is going to be equal to the EBIT here. Oops, nope, I want this one equal to the EBIT there. All right, our interest expense then is going to be 2 million times 10%. Number of shares that we have outstanding is 50 on this one. Okay, and so the same formula that we have our EBIT minus our interest expense times 1 minus my tax rate. Close that out. Divided by my number of shares outstanding would give me that. Okay. Now what I want is my EBIT difference. I want, let's see, I want this EBIT minus this one. And what we're going to do is we want this difference to be 0. So we're going to use a neat little tool called Goal Seek, which you can find if you go to the Data tab, click on What If Analysis, and if you choose Goal Seek, okay, so what you want is you want to set cell E33. We want this to be 0. We want the difference to be 0, and go ahead and change the EBIT indifference level however you want. And if we click OK, this should work and run through what we want to get. And there it did. So it shows us actually the EBIT indifference level is $400,000 at $400,000 that we see. Okay, so that's what we have. That would give us our answer to A and B. So the indifference point between these two structures would be $400,000. Which scenario would we choose if EBIT is expected to be $300,000 per year? What's that going to give us? Let's see, EBIT would be 300. Oh, that was 30. 300. All right, so notice A would actually be a higher earnings per share at 300, and if we switch this to 500, switch this one to 500 EBIT. So B would actually be a preferable scenario to get a higher earnings per share. And that would be ICA 15.3.